I suppose it's getting to be that time of year again where you have these pseudo-profound individuals and groups emerging from their own intellectual hug boxes in order to inform everybody just how absurdly lacking they are in just sheer reading comprehension, because it seems like it's on a fairly consistent basis. People want to attempt to tear down Lord of the Rings, and one of the more common, and in this example right here, the always reliable counter to the greatest work of fantasy fiction. I would say full stop of fiction, but to each their own, I suppose. But it's always George R.R. Martin, A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, and in this case right here, it's really tough to tell. Like, if we're going movies against the TV show, I already reject the premise of this entire statement. But if you're taking a look at the literary landscapes of both franchises, it's even more absurd. But saying you like Lord of the Rings over Game of Thrones or any other morally gray universe is basically a self-report that you see the world in simple black and white terms rather than trying to grasp its complexity. It's more about intellect than it is about taste. Well, this is somebody who desperately wants the world to think that they are just the biggest smart individual. Because, okay, cool, we'll just address this at a couple of different levels. The reason that you might like Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire better than The Lord of the Rings or Tolkien's Legendarium is because perhaps you like the setting better. Perhaps the characters appeal to you more. Maybe you like some of the more adult themes heavily present. I don't know, man. Like, there's a multitude of reasons that somebody could prefer Game of Thrones. But reducing your opinion as to why one would prefer one over the other as a simple IQ check, it's like that is a new take on an old battle. It's normally just well, I liked Lord of the Rings when I was younger, but when I eventually grew up, I came to understand that the world was a little bit more complex than that, and I think most people would come to that conclusion too. But to simply reduce The Lord of the Rings as just, a black and white story is like, did you forget about a lot of the internal struggles that several of the characters have? Theoden comes to mind. You got Saruman's turn to darkness. It's like, those are just ones that immediately come off the top of my head from the movies, of course. And then, of course, if you factor in a lot of the other works from the first, second, and the expanded Legendarium, I mean, just by sheer volume, you have far more examples of moral complexity. Like, you got the different kinslings that took place in the First Age, and while it's present in the movies, you've got the entire story of Isildur, and it's also a different telling depending on the books as well, and comparing that to the movies, about how he keeps the ring, why he wants to keep the ring, and how he uses, and in fact doesn't use the ring, while he is the king of the unified realm of Middle-earth. And so, no, it's just, it's a faulty premise, and given the fact that this thing has 3 million views on it and a hell of a lot of interactions, this is yet another example of why I'm happy that the monetization problem on Twitter could be disappearing in the near future. But it's not the only terrible Lord of the Rings take we have seen recently. Yeah, this old chestnut is popping up once again. Students shall not pass. Good job, Telegraph. Decent headline. Unless they accept Lord of the Rings is offensive, because of course it is. And it's like, could you guys have picked just two characters that have less to do with one another than Gandalf the White and Melkor? Like, okay, that's weird, but the university course suggests Tolkien's treatment of evil characters follows a tradition of anti-African antipathy. Wait, what? Okay, yeah, this is like a new level of stupidity. University is teaching students that J.R.R. Tolkien demonizes people of color in the Lord of the Rings books. Okay. According to a module called Decolonizing Tolkien et al., of course, taught at the University of Nottingham, really, uses a text that says, Orcs and other dark-skinned characters in the trilogy are the victims of ethnic chauvinism. Right. You have a British man wanting to tell a quintessential British history, and you want to play a game of what about the darkies? Because once again, people are looking at orcs and seeing black people. That's weird. And then, of course, Easterlings and I guess the Nazgul. Are you throwing those in for your quote-unquote dark-skinned characters? Like, oh yeah, the tribes of people who have banded with Sauron, and the other ones that are slave to his will because their evil, or rather their less than savory proclivities were exploited by the powers of the nine rings for men. But okay, okay, this makes sense. Onyeka Nubia, okay, a historian and writer who leads the module, argues that Eastern races in the fictional realm of Middle-earth are depicted as evil, while fair-skinned peoples of the West are shown as virtuous. Right, like all of those virtuous, wild men of the Westfold, right? And all of those people that live in the Shire. All of those people that live in Rivendell and Lothlorien. Yeah, of course, yeah. In academia, decolonizing usually means re-examining or moving away from white Western viewpoints. Yeah, exactly. This guy's mad that one of the most popular book series of all time, selling in excess of 150 million copies sold. Yeah, exactly. And a series that back in 2003 was declared the nation's best loved book by the BBC in Britain. They would never do that now, but they did back in the cut. Similar, yes, in 2004 for both Germany and Australia. Oh, interesting. Shows The Lord of the Rings is their favorite book. 1999 poll by Amazon.com customers. So before the movies, Lord of the Rings was judged their favorite book of the millennium. Yeah, in 2019, the BBC listed The Lord of the Rings on its list of 100 most inspiring novels. I tried to figure out what ranking that ended up being afforded to The Lord of the Rings. It's just an amalgamation of 100 stories with no tier lists available. But yeah, no, you got it here, Doc Nubia. You got it. You take a look at that orc right there, and then also the orcs in Rings of Power Season 1, who are about as white as the driven snow. Like, all he wants is a little bit off the flank because all they've been eating is maggoty bread for 3 stinking days. Like, why he's lumped in with everybody else. The module's cortex, Dr. Onyeka writes that maligned peoples include Easterlings, Southrons, and the men from Harad. Alright, the Southrons that end up inheriting a lot of the land that ends up getting liberated during the Fourth Age after the fall of Sauron. Anyways, yeah, and the men from Harad who have a long history of betraying, going all the way back to the First Age, of betraying the elves and the men of the West. Yeah, why ever would they be depicted as being mean and untrustworthy, right? It's clearly their race, clearly the color of their skin, theoretically. Trilogy also features, yes, the dark-skinned orcs, evil creatures that did the bidding of Sauron, well, and previously out of Morgoth, because do you know how the orcs came to be? They were elves once. Yes, but yeah. Oh, and here's another thing, guys, because Sauron, he's known as the Dark Lord, and it's obvious because him and Morgoth are depicted as wearing black armor, so obviously they're black, and that means that they're bad. It adds that Tolkien's treatment to the fictional races shares in a tradition of anti-African antipathy. Bro, what the fuck are we doing? In which people from Africa are painted as the natural enemy of the white man. What? Okay. The module also examines racial issues in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Yeah, of course, because Lewis and Tolkien, were good friends. And so they obviously just commiserated about religion, politics of the time, and then also racism. Callerman and C.S. Lewis fantasy novel have long been seen by some as exhibiting Oriental stereotypes, as they described as cruel people with long beards and orange-colored turbans. Okay. I don't know, man. Have you been to a corner store and somebody's feeling particularly ornery behind the register? I mean, shit kind of checks out. Students of the course in Nottingham will also learn to repopulate the canon of British myth and legend. Yeah, because they're just big mad, right? Because there is nothing that has come close to standing the test of time of The Lord of the Rings that literally anybody else has cranked out, except for C.S. Lewis. I have to check the timelines on that one. But they came out, Chronicles of Narnia I'm talking about here. They came out in relatively similar periods of time. And so instead of having intellectual conversations as to why we believe there are either shortcomings of the legendarium, they just have to use all of these whataboutism argumentations or these emotional appeals that, oh, you have people that are depicted as dark and they're evil. That means that you hate black people. Just kind of goes to show just how amazing this story is and why it still remains undefeated in multiple mediums. So with all that said, thank you all very much for the gift of your time. I've been Don Consuelo. I want you to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.